Somewhere in the middle of a desert or deep inside a military base, or hidden behind layers of security clearance and chain-link fencing, there is a city that does not appear on any public map. It has streets, it has buildings, it has alleyways and storefronts and apartments and mosques and market squares. People move through it every single day, but nobody lives there permanently. Nobody shops there. Nobody raises a family there. Because this city was built for one purpose, and one purpose only: to teach soldiers how to survive, how to fight, and how to win inside the most dangerous environment a human being can enter: urban warfare. And what goes on inside those walls, the training, the doctrine, the psychological pressure, the technology, the casualties that happen even in practice, will absolutely change the way you think about modern combat. Before we go any further, take a second right now to subscribe. Over 98% of viewers watch without ever hitting that button. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to keeping stories like this one coming. Now let's talk about what this place actually is, why it exists, and why the men and women trained inside it say it is the closest thing to real war they have ever experienced, without actually being in one. The world changed in a way that military strategists did not fully predict. For most of the 20th century, armies trained to fight other armies across open ground, tanks rolling through plains, artillery pounding distant hillsides, fighter jets dueling over open sky. That was the vision of warfare that shaped military doctrine for generations. And then came the battles that rewrote every assumption: Hue City in Vietnam, Mogadishu in Somalia, Grozny in Chechnya, Fallujah in Iraq, Sadr City, Ramadi, Mosul. One after another, the wars of the modern era dragged soldiers off open ground and into cities, into neighborhoods, into buildings with blown-out walls and staircases rigged with explosives, and civilians mixed in with fighters, and no clear front line, and no safe direction to point a weapon. And soldiers died. They died in massive numbers. Not because they lacked courage or firepower. They died because nobody had truly prepared them for what it felt like to fight in a place that looked exactly like the environment where normal human beings live their daily lives. A street can be ambush ground. A doorway can be a kill zone. A child on a corner can be an observer feeding positions to the enemy. A stairwell can become the most terrifying 12 feet of a person's entire life. The military looked at the casualty reports from these battles and made a decision. If this is where the wars of the future are going to be fought, then this is where soldiers need to train before they ever set foot in the real thing. And so they built the secret city. Not one, many. But the concept is the same across all of them. They are called military operations on urban terrain facilities. Mout sites. Some people call them combat towns. Some call them urban assault training centers. Whatever the name, the structure and the purpose are identical. They are fake cities built to real scale, designed to recreate every element of urban combat as accurately as possible, without the actual bullets killing the actual people doing the training. And they are far more sophisticated than most civilians could ever imagine. Let's start with the physical space. Because when you walk into one of these training cities for the first time, the experience is jarring. Your brain expects a training facility to look like a training facility. Targets on a range, obstacles on a course, instructors with clipboards. Instead, what you see is a city, a real-looking, functioning, three-dimensional city with roads wide enough for vehicles, sidewalks, alleys narrow enough that two people can barely pass each other, multi-story buildings with real staircases and real doorways and real windows. There are market-style structures that look exactly like open-air bazaars in the Middle East. There are apartment blocks with multiple floors and interior corridors. There are vehicles parked in the streets, some of them burned out wrecks, some of them intact. There are signs in foreign languages on storefront walls. There are cultural artifacts carefully chosen to match whatever region the soldiers are being prepared to operate in. The designers of these facilities do not cut corners on authenticity. They know that the brain prepares itself for what it has previously experienced. If the training environment feels real, the brain begins to encode real responses. And when the actual situation comes, those encoded responses activate. The soldier who has sprinted down a Mout alley 100 times in training does not freeze at the mouth of a real alley in Mosul. His body has already done it. His brain has already navigated the fear. That is the entire theory behind these places. Stress inoculation through immersion. You cannot prepare someone for the unimaginable by describing it. You have to put them inside something as close to it as possible, and make them function anyway. The buildings themselves are worth examining in detail because the engineering that goes into them is not casual. These structures are designed to be modified, Walls can be repositioned, doorways can be sealed or opened, staircases can be reconfigured. Room layouts can be changed overnight so that soldiers who trained in the same building yesterday find a completely different floor plan today. This is deliberate. It prevents what trainers call course memorization, the tendency of soldiers to stop reading their environment and instead follow a memorized path. In real combat, the enemy does not give you the same building twice. In real combat, every room you have never been in before. So these training cities constantly change their internal geometry to force soldiers to stay adaptive, to stay observant, to never stop processing the environment in real time. Some of the most advanced MOUT facilities in the world are located in the United States, but there are significant installations in the United Kingdom, Israel, South Korea, Germany, France, and Australia, among others. The U.S. Army's primary urban warfare training complex is located at Fort Liberty, formerly known as Fort Bragg in North Carolina. It is called the Joint Readiness Training Center in some contexts, but the urban component known as Razish was built specifically to simulate a Middle Eastern city. And when soldiers arrive there, the experience is total. There is Arabic script on the walls. There is cultural music playing from speakers. There are role players, actual hired civilians and actors who move through the streets, interact with soldiers, sometimes playing innocent bystanders, sometimes playing informants, sometimes playing insurgents who blend into the crowd until the moment they don't. The psychological complexity of that experience cannot be overstated. Soldiers must make split-second decisions about who is dangerous and who is not. They must navigate rules of engagement. They must communicate under fire. They must care for casualties while the contact continues. And they must do all of this in an environment deliberately designed to confuse, overwhelm, and disorient them. Because that is exactly what real urban combat does. Fort Irwin in California, home of the National Training Center, has a village complex called Atterbury that plays a similar role for units preparing for desert and Middle Eastern deployments. But perhaps the most impressive, most extensively documented urban training environment is the one operated by the Marine Corps at 29 Palms, also in California. Their Mojave Viper training program runs soldiers and Marines through an extensive simulated Iraqi and Afghan environment, complete with role players, scripted scenarios, and opposition forces playing the role of insurgents. Marines who have completed Mojave Viper and then deployed to actual combat zones consistently report the same thing. It was realistic enough that the real thing felt familiar. Not less terrifying, not less dangerous, but familiar. And in combat, familiarity is the difference between freezing and moving. Now let's talk about the people who make these places work. Because the physical city is only half of it. The other half is the human element, and it is where these training programs become genuinely extraordinary. Every major combat training center maintains a cadre of what the military calls opposing force, or OPFOR. These are experienced soldiers whose entire job is to be the enemy, and they are very, very good at it. OPFOR units spend months, sometimes years, studying the tactics, techniques, and procedures of real-world adversaries. They study insurgent behavior. They study how fighters in specific regions of the world move, communicate, set ambushes, use civilian cover, rig improvised explosives, and adapt when their plans fail. And then they take that knowledge into the training city, and they use it against the incoming units with full commitment. There is no courtesy in this. OPFOR does not go easy on the trainees. Their job is to make the scenario as hard, as confusing, and as realistic as possible, because the harder the training, the better the outcome when it counts. Units that go against an experienced OPFOR and get destroyed in training, they learn. They learn in a way that a classroom briefing could never teach. They learn because they felt it, because their buddy who was playing the role of the casualty was actually on the ground, and they had to figure out how to treat the wound and keep moving at the same time. Because the ambush came from exactly the direction they were not watching. Because their communications broke down at the worst possible moment, and they had to solve that problem under pressure, with the clock running. And then there are the role players. These are civilians, often contracted through specialized companies, who are trained to interact with soldiers in ways that reflect the cultural and social dynamics of the region being simulated. Some of them are native speakers of the relevant language. Some of them are former refugees who actually grew up in the kinds of communities being simulated. They play local citizens going about their day. They play informants who want to cooperate. They play frightened families. They play market vendors. They play angry crowds. And embedded among them, Invisible to the arriving soldiers are role players whose job is to play insurgents hiding in plain sight. The soldiers have to navigate all of this. They have to communicate respectfully with local civilians, gather intelligence, identify threats before those threats act, and simultaneously manage a tactical mission with a definite objective. It is a cognitive load that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it. And that is exactly the point. The technology inside these training cities is worth its own examination because it has evolved far beyond anything the public typically imagines. In the early days of MOUT training, the primary feedback mechanism was simple. An instructor watched what happened and told you what you did wrong. Maybe there was a laser tag-style system that tracked simulated hits. That was about it. Today, the infrastructure inside these facilities is something closer to a military-grade video game engine running in real space. Most advanced training centers now use the Multiple Integrated Laser Engagement System, known as MILES. This is a far more sophisticated version of what most civilians know as laser tag. Every soldier wears sensor harnesses. Every weapon fires laser pulses that actually correspond to the ballistic characteristics of that specific weapon. A rifle shot has a different range and trajectory calculation than a grenade launcher. A machine gun fires differently than a pistol. When a laser pulse hits a sensor harness, the system registers a hit, calculates whether it would be lethal or wounding based on the hit location and the weapon that fired, and the harness responds accordingly. A lethal hit freezes the harness, and the soldier is required to treat themselves as a casualty. A wounding hit triggers a different response. The data from all of this, every engagement, every hit, every miss, every movement of every soldier throughout the entire exercise is recorded and stored in real time by a central tracking system. After every major training exercise, every unit sits through what is called an after-action review, the AAR. And this is where the real learning happens. In an AAR, the instructors play back the exercise using the data collected by the tracking system. They show the unit exactly where they were when the ambush happened. They show them where the OPFOR was, how the OPFOR saw them coming, why the OPFOR chose that moment and that angle to initiate contact. They show them who got hit, when, and from what direction. They show them the 3 seconds before the first casualty, where a different decision by the squad leader would have changed the outcome. There is nowhere to hide in an AAR. Every mistake is on the record. Every failure of communication, every missed observation, every moment of hesitation, every wrong turn is in the data. And the soldiers sit there and they watch it and they absorb it. Good units do not get defensive. They get hungry. They want to know exactly what they did wrong, so they never do it again. That is the culture that these training environments are designed to build. Some of the newest training facilities have pushed beyond MILES into something even more immersive. Augmented reality overlays allow trainers to inject simulated elements into the real physical environment. A soldier moving through a real building can see on a heads-up display a simulated threat that their sensors register as real. Drone systems operated by OPFOR can simulate aerial surveillance. Scenario controllers can inject smoke, sound effects, scripted civilian behavior, and timed explosive events using speakers, pyrotechnics, and environmental control systems built into the training city itself. The result is an experience so dense, so layered, so relentlessly demanding that soldiers coming out the other side describe it as mentally exhausting in a way that physical training almost never is. Your body can adapt to running, to lifting, to carrying weight. But adapting to the decision-making pressure of simulated combat in a complex urban environment is a different kind of hard. It taxes the human nervous system in a way that nothing else quite replicates, and that is by design. Let's go deeper into what the training actually looks like from the soldier's perspective. Because the abstract description of a training city only takes you so far. What actually happens when a unit steps off the bus and begins a rotation? It starts days or even weeks before they ever set foot in the urban environment. The pre-deployment workup involves extensive classroom instruction. Soldiers learn the rules of engagement for the simulated scenario. They learn the cultural context of the environment they will be operating in. Who are the factions? What is the history? What do the civilians in this area want? What do they fear? What are the most likely threat profiles? Who are the key leaders in the town? What is the command structure of the opposing force? This is not abstract study. It is operationally relevant information that soldiers are expected to use during the exercise. Because in real combat, the unit that understands the human terrain of an area operates fundamentally differently than the unit that only understands the physical terrain, and the unit that understands both is the one that comes home. Then the unit enters the city. and from the moment they step inside, the scenario is live. There is no out-of-character moment. There is no pause button. The role players are in position. The Op4 is in position. The scenario controllers are watching from cameras mounted throughout the training city, cameras that cover virtually every angle of every street and every building interior. The unit has a mission. Maybe it is a cordon search. They need to locate a specific high-value individual believed to be hiding in a particular block of the city. Maybe it is a route clearance. They need to get a convoy through a specific street that intelligence says is compromised. Maybe it is a humanitarian mission with a security element, delivering supplies to a particular building while maintaining situational awareness for potential threats. Whatever the mission, it is specific, it is timed, and it is complicated by everything the scenario designers have built into the environment. The first thing that almost always happens is information overload. Soldiers who have been through it describe the first hour of a serious mount rotation as a kind of controlled chaos. There is too much to look at. Every window is a potential threat. Every person on the street requires assessment. The radios are busy. The squad leader is issuing commands. The point man is calling out movement. A role player approaches and begins speaking in a foreign language that the unit needs a translator or an interpreter tablet to communicate with. Simultaneously, 2 streets over, there is the sound of shouting. Simultaneously, a soldier at the rear of the formation thinks he saw movement in an upper window. The squad leader has to process all of this and make a decision in approximately 3 seconds. And whatever that decision is, it will shape the next 15 minutes of the exercise. Because decisions in urban warfare compound. A wrong turn takes you into a kill zone. A failure to clear a room properly means the threat behind you that you thought was neutralized is still active. Moving too fast means you outpace your security element and create a gap that an experienced enemy will exploit immediately. This is what makes urban warfare fundamentally different from open ground combat. In the open, threats generally come from a limited number of directions determined by the terrain. In a city, threats can come from above, from below, from directly in front, from directly behind, from a window 3 stories up and 40 meters to the left, from a doorway you passed 2 minutes ago. The geometry of threat is 3-dimensional and omnidirectional. Human beings are not naturally built to process that level of environmental threat simultaneously. It requires training, specifically the kind of training that puts you inside the environment and forces your nervous system to develop new patterns of observation and response. One of the most important skills trained in these environments is what soldiers call the tactical pause. Under pressure, the instinct is to keep moving. Movement feels like progress, but in an urban environment, undisciplined movement is one of the fastest ways to get killed. A tactical pause is a deliberate moment where the unit stops, reassesses, confirms its understanding of the environment, verifies the positions of friendly forces, makes a plan, and then moves. Units that learn to take tactical pauses in training save lives in real combat. Units that do not learn this, that keep pushing through the discomfort of uncertainty without pausing to actually think, run into ambushes, run into crossfire, make the exact mistakes that experienced fighters know to expect from undisciplined opponents. The training for building clearance is among the most physically and psychologically demanding of all. Clearing a building is not simply walking through rooms and checking that they are empty. Every room that has not been cleared is hostile ground. Every closed door is a potential death. Every corner is a potential threat position. The procedures for entering and clearing a room have been developed over decades of combat experience, refined through blood and loss, and standardized into doctrine that is trained, rehearsed, and executed with the same repetitive discipline that a musician uses to master a piece of music. Stack formation at the door. Breach. Entry. The first soldier through takes a specific sector. The second takes the opposite sector. The room is physically split into pie-shaped areas of responsibility. Every corner is cleared to a standard. Every closet, every bathroom, every space large enough to conceal a person is checked. The process is fast. It is also precise. Fast without precision gets people killed. Precision without speed gives the enemy time. Finding the balance between the two is the art of urban combat. And you can only find that balance through repetition, inside an environment that makes the failure cost something. And inside these training cities, the failure costs reputation. It costs time. It costs having to stand in front of your peers and your chain of command, in an AAR, and account for the moment you stacked up on the wrong side of the door and your point man got hit because of it. That social consequence is not trivial. The military runs on unit cohesion and reputation. Being known as the unit that got destroyed during their MOUT rotation because of basic errors in building clearance is a powerful motivator. Nobody wants that. So they train harder. They repeat the drill until it is automatic, until the stack forms without a word being spoken, until every soldier in the element knows exactly where every other soldier is going to be the moment that door opens. That level of shared understanding, that tactical telepathy built through thousands of repetitions, is what separates a unit that survives urban combat from one that does not. Now let us talk about the role players in more detail, because they are genuinely one of the most fascinating and underappreciated elements of the entire training system. The companies that provide role players to major military training centers maintain extensive databases of scenarios, cultural coaches, language instructors, and behavioral specialists. Before a rotation begins, the role player cadre receives a detailed brief on the scenario. They know the backstory of the fictional town. They know who their character is, what that character wants, what that character fears, what that character knows about the military presence in the area, and how that character is likely to interact with soldiers. Some role players play characters who are genuinely trying to help the military unit. They have information. They want to provide it, but they are scared. They have families. They are worried about what happens to them if the insurgent network finds out they talked. Getting that information out of them requires patience, cultural sensitivity, the right approach, the right tone, the right respect for cultural norms. A soldier who walks up to that character and immediately demands information using aggressive body language will get nothing. A soldier who approaches correctly, who takes the time to establish basic rapport, who demonstrates respect for the individual in front of them, might get everything they need to complete the mission. That dynamic, that human intelligence dynamic, is not something you can train on a shooting range. You train it by actually doing it. By actually sitting across from a human being who is playing a frightened civilian and figuring out how to communicate effectively in a situation of extreme uncertainty. Other role players play characters who are actively hostile, but not overtly so. They are part of the network. They are watching the military unit. They are reporting positions. They are counting vehicles. And if the unit trips certain triggers, if they move in a way that creates an opportunity, if they set up in a location that the scenario has pre-designated as an ambush site, the call goes to the OP4 element, and the scenario shifts from observation to kinetic contact. The soldiers do not know exactly when that shift will happen. They do not know which role player is a spotter and which is a genuine bystander. They have to make constant assessments and constant adjustments, and they have to do it while also completing the tactical mission they were assigned. The cognitive demand of all of this running simultaneously is extraordinary, and it is exactly the right kind of extraordinary, because that is what combat actually is. The medical training component of MOUT exercises deserves its own discussion because it is one of the most viscerally realistic aspects of the entire program. Modern combat trauma training has evolved dramatically over the past 2 decades, driven in large part by the lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan. The primary killer in combat is not the wound itself. It is the time between the wound and treatment. Hemorrhage, specifically massive extremity hemorrhage and junctional hemorrhage, kills faster than almost any other injury mechanism. If a soldier cannot manage their own wound, or the wound of the person next to them in the first 60 to 90 seconds after being hit, that person has a dramatically lower chance of survival. This understanding, bought at tremendous cost in real combat, has completely transformed how medical training is integrated into urban warfare exercises. In a serious MOUT rotation, every simulated casualty is an actual training event. When a soldier takes a hit during an exercise, the exercise does not pause. The scenario continues. The unit must manage the casualty while maintaining tactical awareness, maintaining communication, maintaining the mission. The soldier designated as the casualty is required to play that role accurately. If the Miles system registered a wound to the leg, that soldier sits down. They are not ambulatory. They require assistance. The other soldiers have to apply a tourniquet, which in training they actually do, using real medical equipment on a real person. They have to call for a casualty evacuation. They have to designate a security element to protect the casualty while treatment is administered. They have to communicate the situation to their chain of command. And they have to do all of this while the OP4, who knows they now have a casualty and knows that managing a casualty consumes significant combat power, is potentially maneuvering to press that advantage, because that is exactly what a real enemy does. The moment you go down is the moment a capable opponent sees opportunity. Training for that reality means training the casualty scenario as a complete tactical problem, not just a medical procedure. The buildings themselves inside these training cities contain another layer of complexity that most people never think about. They are rigged. Not with real explosives, but with training devices that simulate explosive threats in ways that create genuine startle responses and genuine tactical decisions. Pyrotechnic devices can simulate the sound and flash of an IED detonation. Smoke can be released from specific locations to simulate a blast. Paintball devices can simulate fragmentation. A soldier who enters a building and triggers one of these devices experiences a genuine physiological stress response. Their heart rate spikes, their body dumps adrenaline, and then, critically, they have to keep functioning. They have to assess what happened. They have to determine if there are secondary devices. They have to treat any casualties. They have to continue the mission, or they have to make the decision to abort the mission and extract. These are real command decisions being made in a genuine stress state. And that is the closest thing to combat that training can provide. Now let us talk about some of the specific facilities in more detail, because each one has a character, a history, and a level of sophistication that is worth understanding. The Joint Multinational Readiness Center in Hohenfels, Germany, is one of NATO's most important training facilities. It is located in a remote valley in Bavaria, and the training area spans over 163 square miles. Within that area is an extensive urban training complex that includes dozens of simulated villages and towns. What makes Hohenfels particularly significant is that it trains not just American forces, but NATO allied forces from across Europe and beyond. Units from Poland, Germany, the Netherlands, France, the Baltic states, and many others rotate through this facility. The urban training complex at Hohenfels has been used to prepare forces for operations in Kosovo, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and various African contingencies. The scenarios run there are not generic. They are tailored to the specific operational environment that the deploying unit is heading into. If a German army unit is preparing to rotate into a specific country with a specific threat profile and a specific cultural context, the role players at Hohenfels are briefed on that country, that culture, that threat. The city adapts. The signs on the walls change, the cultural music changes, the scripted scenarios change. The city is essentially reprogrammed for each rotation. That adaptability is one of the most important features of a well-designed MOUT facility. In Israel, the concept of urban warfare training has a particular intensity that reflects the operational realities that the Israel Defense Forces face. The IDF operates a facility known informally as the Urban Warfare Training Center, located in the Negev Desert. This facility is one of the most realistic and most extensively equipped urban training sites in the world. It was built and expanded significantly after the Second Lebanon War in 2006, when IDF ground forces encountered significant challenges operating in the dense urban terrain of southern Lebanese villages. The lessons of that war were written in blood, and the IDF made the decision to fundamentally restructure its urban warfare training. The result is a facility that simulates not just the physical environment of the kinds of built-up areas IDF forces might operate in, but the tunnel systems, the underground infrastructure, the multi-level threat geometry that has become a defining feature of modern urban conflict in that region. Soldiers there train to fight above ground, on ground, and below ground simultaneously. They train to transition between those levels under fire. They train to communicate and maintain unit cohesion when half their element is in a building, a quarter is on the street, and the rest are operating underground. The complexity of that challenge is enormous. The training that prepares soldiers for it is correspondingly demanding. In the United Kingdom, the British Army operates a training center known as Cope Hill Down in Wiltshire, sometimes called Ghost Village, because it is a full-scale simulated village that has been in operation since the early 1970s. It has been repeatedly upgraded and expanded over the decades. There is also Sennelager in Germany, a British Army training area with extensive urban warfare facilities. The British have extensive operational experience in urban environments, going back through the Troubles in Northern Ireland, through operations in Bosnia, Sierra Leone, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and that experience has been directly translated into training doctrine and training infrastructure. British MOUT training is notable for its emphasis on the human terrain, on the political dimensions of urban operations, on the way that individual tactical decisions at the soldier level can have strategic consequences for the broader mission. This reflects lessons learned in Northern Ireland specifically, where the British Army spent decades operating in a complex urban environment, where winning firefights while losing the population was not winning at all. Let us go back to the human experience of training inside these cities, because that is ultimately what matters most. Veterans who have been through serious MOUT rotations and then deployed to actual combat consistently report a particular phenomenon. In the moments of actual combat, the training does not feel like memory. It feels like reflex. The stack forms automatically. The room-clearing sequence executes without conscious direction. The casualty response initiates before the conscious mind has fully processed what happened. That is the goal of this entire system. The goal is to push the behaviors so deep into the nervous system that they execute below the level of conscious thought. Because conscious thought is slow. Conscious thought in a firefight means a second or two of delay between stimulus and response. And in a firefight, a second or two is everything. The soldier whose training has made the correct response automatic does not experience that delay. The behavior is already in motion before fear can interfere with it, before confusion can interfere, before the sheer overwhelming sensory load of the environment can interfere. This is not magic. It is not even unique to military training. Elite athletes describe the same phenomenon. A professional tennis player does not consciously decide to return a serve traveling at 140 miles per hour. The body has been trained to the point where the response pattern is encoded at a level below conscious decision-making. A surgeon does not consciously think through every step of a procedure they have performed hundreds of times. The sequence runs. The difference in the military context is that the stakes for failure are not a lost point or a complication. They are a dead soldier, or a dead civilian, or a failed mission with geopolitical consequences that extend far beyond the engagement itself. The psychological dimension of training in these cities also extends to what the military calls the moral and ethical demands of urban combat, because there is no aspect of warfare more morally complex than fighting in a populated area. The fundamental challenge of urban combat is that the environment civilians live in, the streets they walk, the buildings they shelter in, the markets they shop in, is simultaneously the terrain that both sides are fighting over and through. The enemy deliberately operates in that environment because it degrades the military effectiveness of a more powerful opponent. A ground force that is constrained by rules of engagement designed to minimize civilian harm is a ground force that cannot use its full firepower, cannot move freely, cannot clear a building with the same speed and aggression it could apply in an unpopulated area. The presence of civilians is therefore not incidental to urban warfare. For many adversaries, it is a deliberate strategic asset. Training soldiers to navigate that moral complexity is one of the most difficult challenges these facilities face. It is not enough to train someone to clear a room fast. You have to train them to make the split-second determination about what is in that room before they act on it. You have to train them to hold fire when the target is unclear, even when holding fire feels dangerous, and to engage immediately when the target is clear, even when engaging feels uncertain. That is a razor's edge that training in a controlled environment can approach, but never fully replicate, because the true stakes are never fully replicable. The training city builds the reflex. The real environment tests the character, and the hope, the institutional hope embedded in the entire training enterprise, is that the reflex has been built well enough and the character has been developed strongly enough that the decisions made in the real environment are the right ones. Let us talk about the future of these facilities, because the technology driving their development is evolving faster than at any previous point in history. The next generation of urban warfare training infrastructure is being built around three intersecting technologies: synthetic training environments, advanced sensor networks, and artificial intelligence-driven scenario generation. Synthetic training environments are essentially high-fidelity virtual reality systems that can recreate any urban environment in digital space at a level of detail and physical accuracy that was not possible 10 years ago. Soldiers wearing VR headsets can practice room clearance, route selection, and force-on-force engagements in digital replicas of actual cities. These systems can run scenarios in cities that do not yet have a physical MOUT equivalent, including cities that intelligence suggests might be future operational environments. The system can generate variations of those scenarios instantly, so that every rehearsal is slightly different, preventing the course memorization problem that real-world MOUT designers combat by physically rebuilding their facilities. Advanced sensor networks in physical training cities are expanding what instructors can see and measure during exercises. Beyond tracking individual soldier positions and miles engagement data, new sensor systems can measure heart rate, galvanic skin response indicating stress levels, movement speed and pattern, response times to specific stimuli, and vocal communication patterns. This physiological data, combined with positional and engagement data, gives instructors an unprecedented picture of how individual soldiers and collective units perform under stress. It allows for personalized training prescriptions. A soldier whose data shows that their response time degrades sharply at high heart rates gets specific training interventions to address that. A unit whose communication patterns break down when under fire gets specific communication drills built around the conditions that cause the breakdown. The training becomes adaptive in a way that was not possible when feedback was limited to what an instructor could observe with human eyes. Artificial intelligence is beginning to play a role in scenario generation and OPFOR behavior. Instead of human OPFOR controllers making decisions about how the opposing force moves and responds, AI systems can now drive simulated opponent behavior in real time, adapting to the unit's actions with a consistency and a speed that human controllers cannot fully match. This does not replace human OPFOR in physical facilities, but it dramatically expands the complexity and the adaptability of scenarios in synthetic environments. An AI-driven opponent can simultaneously manage 20 different simulated combatants, each responding independently to the evolving tactical situation, in ways that a human controller managing the same scenario would find physically impossible. The result is a training opponent that never repeats itself, never gets tired, never makes human errors in scenario management, and always finds the gap in an imperfect tactical execution. Drone technology is also being integrated into training cities in increasingly sophisticated ways. Just as drones have become a defining feature of real-world urban conflict, drones are now a regular feature of advanced MOUT training. Units trained to operate under simulated drone surveillance, to detect and engage hostile drone systems, to use their own drone assets for reconnaissance in the urban environment, and to make tactical decisions based on a drone picture of an area that may be accurate, may be incomplete, or may be deliberately manipulated. Because in real combat, the information picture is never complete and is never fully reliable. Training soldiers to make good decisions with imperfect information is as important as training them to execute correctly when the information is good. There is another dimension of these training cities that almost never gets discussed publicly, and it is the one that may ultimately be most important. These facilities train not just how to fight in cities, they train commanders at every level, from squad to battalion to brigade, in how to think about cities, how to read urban terrain, how to analyze a city block the way a chess player analyzes a board, how to identify the choke points, the dominant terrain features, the likely approach routes, the buildings that provide observation across the widest area, the structures whose control would give a defender maximum advantage, the gaps in a defensive network that an attacker could exploit. This cognitive skill, this ability to see a city as a tactical problem and solve that problem with a combination of firepower, maneuver, intelligence, and negotiation, is the thing that separates an officer who has been through serious urban warfare training from one who has not. And it is not just about the immediate tactical environment. Commanders at the operational level have to think about how their actions in the urban environment affect the population over time. A city that is cleared of enemy fighters at the cost of massive structural damage and civilian casualties is not a military victory in any strategically meaningful sense, because the damage and the casualties generate grievances. Grievances generate recruits for the next generation of opponents. The military that wins the battle but loses the population has not solved the problem. It has extended it and intensified it. This understanding, which took the American military considerable time and considerable cost to fully absorb through the experience of Iraq and Afghanistan, is now baked into the training doctrine of every serious urban warfare training facility. The soldiers and commanders who rotate through these cities are not just being taught how to clear buildings. They are being taught to think about the second and third order effects of every tactical decision they make inside those buildings. The culture of learning that these training environments create extends beyond the individual rotation. After-action reviews produce written records. Those records feed into institutional knowledge databases. Lessons that a battalion learns in a Hohenfels rotation can be disseminated across the entire force within weeks through what the Army calls its Center for Army Lessons Learned, known as CALL. Tactics that OPFOR use to defeat an incoming unit, if they represent a genuinely new threat technique, get flagged and studied and potentially briefed to units preparing for deployment. The training city is not a static institution. It is a living, evolving organism that continuously absorbs lessons and refines itself. The soldiers who pass through these cities carry something with them that is very difficult to define, but very easy to recognize. There is a particular quality of movement that trained urban warfare soldiers develop. A particular way of walking through any built-up area, not just a training city, that reflects the constant environmental awareness their training has built into them. They notice things: parked vehicles that do not belong, windows that have been darkened, intersections where the sight lines create particular vulnerabilities, doors that have been propped rather than left open naturally. These observations are not the result of conscious analysis. They are pattern recognition developed through thousands of hours of operating in complex environments, where missing a detail could get you killed. It does not turn off when the training ends. Veterans describe walking through ordinary cities, ordinary shopping centers, ordinary parking lots, and experiencing that same awareness running in the background, always reading the environment, always knowing where the exits are, always noting who is out of place. That is what this training does to a person. It rewires the way they see space. The men and women who build and operate these training cities, the instructors, the OPFOR soldiers, the role players, the scenario designers, the engineers, the cultural consultants, they are doing work that most people never think about and never see. Their names do not appear in news reports. Their facilities do not appear on public maps. But the work they do has saved lives, not in a theoretical sense, in a specific, documentable sense. Units that have been through serious MOUT training and then deployed to actual urban combat environments consistently demonstrate better performance, better decision-making, better casualty rates, better mission completion than units that have not received equivalent training. The correlation is not subtle. It is significant, and it is consistent, and it has driven the sustained investment in these facilities by every serious military organization in the world. There is a particular moment that many veterans describe from their MOUT training rotations. It comes after a scenario that went badly, after an ambush that the unit did not see coming, after a building clearance that resulted in multiple simulated casualties, after a moment where everything that could go wrong did go wrong simultaneously. The unit is sitting in the AAR. The instructors are walking through the playback, and every soldier in that room can see exactly, with precision, exactly what happened and exactly why. There is no ambiguity. There is no excuse that holds up against the data. And in that moment, something happens in the unit. Not defeat, not despair, something closer to collective resolve. They did not get it right this time. They will get it right next time. That is not just a professional standard. That is a survival imperative. And the training city, the fake city, built in a desert or a training range, far from anywhere most people will ever go, is where that resolve gets forged. Think about what it takes to build one of these places. Think about the planners who sat down and decided that the best way to prepare human beings for the worst possible experience they might ever have was to build as accurate a replica of that experience as could be constructed. Think about the cultural consultants who studied the architecture, the street layouts, the social customs, the languages, the behavioral patterns of specific regions of the world, so that the training environment would not just